Hey guys, welcome to the stream. Thanks for tuning in. So we back with part two of our affirmative action discussion and consideration. In particular, today I want to focus on Justice Jackson's dissenting judgment, which I think should be an interesting read. So I'm gonna give me 60 seconds, and I'm gonna play some music for you guys, and then we're gonna get into it.
I don't give a fuck what you niggas done. I don't give a fuck where you niggas from. Throw you in your mouth, go and get a gun. Then you slumped on the scene, that's a hit and run. All y'all blast now, all y'all piss now. Fuck it, I'm big draws, I'm Jay Prince now. I frontline wars, we can't fix now. Brought latex gloves, that's no prince now. If you broke bread, you got chip now. Couple things you can't buy inside this town. Loyalty, love, and respect. The niggas really start you out your check. Got you lanes, cause I'm sucker-proof. Don't play no games, boy, I'm busted-proof. Pop at you lanes, cause I'm sucker-proof. Don't play no games, boy, I'm busted-proof. Pop at you lanes, cause I'm sucker-proof. Don't play no games, boy, I'm busted-proof. Pop at you lanes, cause I'm sucker-proof. Don't play no games, boy, I'm busted-proof. I don't give a fuck how you niggas feel. I can tell the fake, I can tell the real. Got a purple heart out the battlefield. Now watch me levitate to 100 mil. Fuck a pound, nigga, fuck a pill. I negotiate a better deal. Fuck around, nigga, yes I will. Take a life or I take a ill. I'm even out the playing field. These niggas wasn't playing fair. I'm solo, still made it here. Rich real nigga, ask your bitch how I make her feel.
Original madman, touch the road and tear up a thousand. The streets them are our own. You don't know if we trap on the streets, but we spend your own. Heavy hotter than a toaster. You violate Russian and Costa. Why this? Lipsy also. Exercise my trigger finger muscle.
Bang bang, money line, this shit so dangerous. You know the lifestyle dangerous. Oh yeah, those colors so dangerous. Love, money, the fame, and the power, this shit so dangerous. Oh, these bitches so dangerous. You know the streets so dangerous. Love,
Pop at you lanes, cause I'm sucker-proof. Don't play no games, boy, I'm busted-proof. Pop at you lanes, cause I'm sucker-proof. Don't play no games, boy, I'm busted-proof. Pop at you lanes, cause I'm sucker-proof. Don't play no games, boy, I'm busted-proof. Pop at you lanes, cause I'm sucker-proof. Don't play no games, boy, I'm busted-proof.
Alright, guys, so I'm back. Alright, so I'm starting this review focusing off on the Justice Jackson's dissenting judgment in Supreme Court Action 600 US 20 of 2023. It was Student for Fair Admissions Incorporated versus the President of and Fellows of Harvard College and the University of North Carolina. So This is essentially a judicial review, a public law, administrative law action. Um, if you don't know, recently the U.S. decided that, or SCOTUS, if you don't know, SCOTUS decided that the Supreme Court decided that affirmative action is not lawful, it is discriminatory. I'm assuming is their thinking. That's at least what the media, that's the summation I think the mainstream media is offered. But I want to start with the dissenting judgments, and then we'll get into the full reasoning of the court with, from Justice Thomas and Kavanaugh and the lady who was recently appointed, and Roberts, and their thinking, what was their thinking. I'm not sure that I agree, even though I have not read their dicta yet. I'm not sure that I agree. I always assumed that this was like a scholarship type thing where, these students who would be the beneficiaries of affirmative action have to be just as, if not equally qualified. I thought it was like, oh, you couldn't afford it. You would not be able to afford it. And yeah, it's an attempt to create diversity on campuses, but I think, I don't know how you, sorry, I'm missing unplug my mic, just making sure everything is good to go. I'm not sure how you get around that socioeconomic factors in coming to the conclusion that it's discriminatory, or the policy behind it, or the reason and the history and the thinking and the fact, everything that went into why this policy was created. Okay, so Gulf size race-based gaps exist with respect to the health, wealth, and well-being of American citizens. Full stop. I think that is a powerful and poignant summation of reality of some of the things that went into creating this policy. And as a public law, administrative law action, it is quite relevant and appropriate, I think, for you to consider those things in assessing the reasonableness, lawfulness, the proportionality of essentially the policy that is affirmative action. Now, I don't have any skin in the game because I would not have benefited from it in any event. I don't live in America. I've never tried it or, sought it. So I don't know. I know, I believe at least that, I guess the American citizens who would not have, I guess, qualified for affirmative action deem it, I guess, reverse racism. I didn't consider it as that. I thought it was more of a economic balancing, a social thing, social economic balancing, that these students would have to be just as, if not equally qualified or more qualified. They'd have to have just as good grades or better. It's just how I just thought it was like a thing where they just wouldn't be able to afford it if it was not for this initiative type thing. But I don't know. Maybe someone in the comments could elaborate, or if they know. So let's get back to it. They were created in the distant past, but have indisputably been passed down to the present day through generations. Every moment these gaps persist is a moment in which this great country falls short of actualizing one of its foundational principles, the self-evident truth that all of us are created equal. Yet today, the court determines that holistic admissions programs like the one that the University of North Carolina has operated, consistent with Greta and Bollinger, are a problem with respect to achievement. Hey, what's up? Yeah, I good. Has operated consistent with Greta and Bollinger are a problem with respect to achievement of that aspiration rather than a viable solution, as has long been evident to historians, sociologists, and policymakers alike. Justice Sotomayor has persuasively established that nothing in the Constitution or Title V prohibits institutions from taking race into account to ensure racial diversity admittance of admits in higher education. I join her opinion without qualification. I write separately to expound upon the universal benefits of considering race in this context, in response to a suggestion that has permeated this legal action from the start. Students for Fair Admissions has maintained both subtly and overtly that it is unfair for a college admissions process to consider race as one factor in a holistic view of its applicants. Okay, full stop. So it is an interesting debate, I think. Um, Again, I don't. My thing is that okay, there's a holistic checklist of things that I guess the admissions boards of these various schools will consider. Race is one of them. I don't know how much that plays into it. I am assuming that, like I said, I'm assuming that these students would have to have equal or greater, just as good as grades as a non color student of color, or essentially white people. I'm assuming that they would have just as much qualifications as a white person, but they have decided that we want to make sure that okay, that there is a mix, a plethora of experiences, cultures. I don't know. This is what I'm presuming. Now, how much weight is actually being given to race? If they were to say, okay, we're giving this is for just along an economic line, would they still be considered if they just turn it around and not say race and just say um, persons of a certain socioeconomic background, would then this claim of reverse racism still exist? Because I mean, at some of these schools in particular too, if a student come there and says that, oh, I'm legacy, I'm this and that, because that's what I often have heard Caucasians use in or consider is a weighty factor in there. I think American students and where they choose to go to school often is this idea of legacy. Or well, my daddy went there, my Grammy went there, my great granddaddy went there. If the admissions board was to give the concept of legacy more weight than say race, is that not the same thing? Because if the whole idea of legacy is that uh you have a family history of attending the school, and the reality then is part of that would be your economics and your race, because it's likely that black people, Mexican people, people of color would not have been allowed, whomever, if they didn't fit a even maybe of a Jewish descent. Who knows? There was a lot of prejudice in these institutions and these things, and are we so sure that those factors, those prejudices, those biases have been simply erased from society and the American psyche today, or do we just not want to accept the reality of what history and quite still modern recent history has been? But anyway, I don't know. Let's get back into it. Um, the contention blinks both history and reality in ways too numerous to count. But the response is simple. Our country has never been colorblind, given the lengthy history of state-sponsored race-based preferences in America. To say that anyone is now victimized if a college considers whether that legacy of discrimination has unequally advantaged its applicants fails to acknowledge the well-documented intergenerational transmission of inequality that still plagues our citizenry. Yes, powerful. I think that this is, I think that the I think the overall judgment or decision is flawed in this because it does call for some revisionist history. It calls for some denial, some delusionment in some instances. It is that inequality that admissions programs such as UNC's help to address to the benefit of us all. Because the majority's judgment stunts that progress without any basis in law, history, logic, or justice, I dissent. Imagine two college applicants from North Carolina, John and James. Both trace their families' North Carolina roots to the year of UNC's founding in 1789. Both love their state and want great things for its people. Both want to honor their family's legacy by attending the state's flagship institution. John, however, would be the seventh generation to graduate from UNC. He is white. James would be the first. He is black. Does the race of these applicants properly play a role in UNC's holistic merits-based admissions process? To answer that question, a page of history is worth a volume of logic. Many chapters of America's history appear necessary given the opinions that my colleagues in the majority have issued in this case. Justice Thurgood Marshall recounted the genesis. 350 years ago, the Negro was dragged to this country in chains to be sold into slavery, uprooted from his homeland and thrust into bondage for forced labor. The slave was deprived of all legal rights. It was unlawful to teach him to read. He could be sold away from his family and friends at the whim of his master, and killing or maiming him was not a crime. The system of slavery brutalized and dehumanized both master and slave. Slavery should have been and was to many self-evidently dissonant with our avowed founding principles. When the time came to resolve that dissonance, 11 states chose slavery. With the Union's survival at stake, Frederick Douglass noted Black Americans in the South were almost the only reliable friends the nation had, and but for their help, the rebels might have succeeded in breaking up the Union. After the war, Senator John Sherman defended the proposed 14th Amendment in a manner that encapsulated our Reconstruction framers' highest sentiments. We are bound by every obligation, by Black Americans' service on the battlefield, by their heroes who are buried in our cause, by their patriotism in the hours that tried our country. We are bound to protect them and all their natural rights. To uphold that promise, the framers repudiated this court's holding in Dred Scott v. Sanford by crafting Reconstruction amendments and associated legislation that transformed our Constitution and society. Even after the second founding, when the need to right historical wrongs should have been cleared beyond cavil, opponents insisted that vindicating equality in this manner slighted white Americans. So when the Reconstruction Congress passed a bill to secure all citizens the same civil rights as enjoyed by white citizens, President Andrew Johnson vetoed it because it discriminated in favor of the Negro. That attitude and the nation's associated retreat from Reconstruction made prophecy out of Congressman Thaddeus Stevens fail that those states will all keep up this discrimination and crush to death the hated freedmen. And this court facilitated that retrenchment. not just in Plessy and Ferguson, but in almost every instance, the court chose to restrict the scope of the second founding. Thus, 13 years pre-Plessy in the civil rights cases, our predecessors on this court invalidated Congress's attempt to enforce the Reconstruction Amendment via the Civil Rights Acts of 1875, lecturing that there must be some stage when black Americans take the rank of a mere citizen and cease to be the special favorite of the laws. But Justice Harlan knew better. He responded, "What the nation through Congress has sought to accomplish in reference to black people is what had already been done in every state of the Union for the white race, to secure and protect rights belonging to them as freemen and citizens, nothing more." Justice Harlan dissented alone, and the betrayal that this court enabled had concrete effects. Enslaved black people had built great wealth, but only for enslavers. No surprise then that freedmen leapt at the chance to control their own labor and to build their own financial security. Still, white Southerners often simply refused to sell land to blacks, even when not selling was economically foolish. To bolster private exclusion, states sometimes pass laws forbidding such sales. The inability to build wealth through that most American of means forced black people into sharecropping roles where they somehow always tended to find themselves in debt to the landowner when the growing season closed, with no hope of recourse against the ever-present cooking of the books. Sharecropping is but one example of race-linked obstacles that the law and private parties laid down to hinder the progress and prosperity of black people. Vagrancy laws criminalize free black men who fail to work for white landlords. Many states barred freedmen from hunting or fishing to ensure that they could not live without entering into de facto re-enslavement as sharecroppers. A cornucopia of laws. Example, banning hitchhiking, prohibiting encouraging a laborer to leave his employer, and penalizing those who prompted black Southerners to migrate northward, ensured that black people could not freely seek better lives elsewhere. And when statutes did not ensure compliance, state-sanctioned and private violence did. Thus emerged Jim Crow, a system that was, as much as anything else, a comprehensive scheme of economic exploitation to replace the black codes, which themselves had replaced slavery's form of comprehensive economic exploitation. Meanwhile, as Jim Crow ossified, the federal government was giving away land on the western frontier, and with it the opportunity for upward mobility and a more secure future. Over the 1862 Homestead Act's three-quarter-century tenure, black people were exceedingly unlikely to be allowed to share in those benefits, which by one calculation may have advantaged approximately 46 million Americans living today. Despite these barriers, black people persisted. Their so-called Great Migration northward accelerated during and after the First World War. Like clockwork, American cities responded with racially exclusionary zoning and similar policies. As a result, black migrants had to pay disproportionately high prices for disproportionately subpar housing. Nor did migration make it more likely for black people to access home ownership, as banks would not lend to black people, and in the rare cases banks would fund home loans, exorbitant interest rates were charged. Pause. This is also, just as a side note, I think this has inspired me. I think I should do a little investigation, see if we have any I think that there are some similarities that are going on today in the Caribbean and how the banking and finance industry operates. First, most banks are foreign Canadian banks, and I think there is a disproportionate and or prejudicial and or some questionable policies and practices surrounding money lending, mortgaging, um, and there's of course this disproportionate issue with housing and land prices, and you have a lot of foreigners buying up land. They qualify. They probably would easier, the or faster qualify for loans that locals and are not. I don't know if that's all of that is simply economics. A lot of times these mortgages and approvals do not happen locally on the ground. They happen at some regional office or head office, and so um, I think we also need to be sure that there's not some isms, some biases that are going into how financing is happening, interest rates. Um, but I don't know, the game is tough, tough all around historically. There's a historic pattern here, if you want to be real about it. But back to my judgment, back to my judgment. Let me finish read. Mm, where was I? Nor did migration make it more likely for black people to access home ownership, as banks would not lend to black people, and in the rare cases, banks would fund home loans. Exorbitant interest rates were charged. With the black people still locked out of the Homestead Act giveaway, it is no surprise that when the Great Depression arrived, race based wealth, health, and opportunity gaps were the norm. The game been fucked up historically. The big, you know, who has historically run these um, pockets of power, and the way society is set up. You can't do anything without even just having the money, and most people don't, or having the access to the money. And who's the gatekeeper? Federal and state government selective intervention further exacerbated the disparities. Consider, for example, the Federal Homeowners Loan Corporation, created in 1933. HOLC purchased mortgages threatened with foreclosure and issued new amortized mortgages in their place. Not only did this mean that recipients of these mortgages could gain equity while paying off the loan, successful full payment would make the recipient a homeowner. Ostensibly to identify and avoid the riskiest recipients, HLC created color-coded maps of every metropolitan area in the nation. Green meant safe, red meant risky, and regardless of class, every neighborhood with black people earned the red designation. Similarly, consider the Federal Housing Administration, created in 1934, which ensured highly desirable bank mortgages. Eligibility for this insurance required an FHA appraisal of the property to ensure a low default risk, but nationwide, it was FHA's established policy to provide no guarantees for mortgages to African Americans or to whites who might lease to African Americans, irrespective of creditworthiness. No surprise then that between 1934 and 1968, 98% of FHA loans went to white Americans, with whole cities, ones that had a disproportionately large number of black people due to housing segregation, sometimes being deemed ineligible for FHA intervention on racial grounds. The Veterans Administrated operated similarly. One more example, the Federal Home Loan Bank Board chartered, insured, and regulated savings and loans associations from the early years of the New Deal, but it did not oppose the denial of mortgages to African Americans until 1961, and even then opposed discrimination ineffectively. The upshot of all this is that due to government policy choices in the suburban shaping years between 1930 and 1960, fewer than 1% of all mortgages in the nation were issued to African Americans. Thus, based on their race, black people were locked out of the greatest mass-based opportunity for wealth accumulation in American history. For present purposes, it is significant that, in so excluding black people, government policies affirmatively operated, one could say affirmatively acted, to dole out preferences to those who, if nothing else, were not black. Those past preferences carried forward and are reinforced today by, among other things, the benefits that flow to homeowners and to the holders of other forms of capital that are hard to obtain unless one already has assets. This discussion of how the existing gaps will form is merely illustrative, not exhaustive. I will pass over Congress' repeated crafting of family, worker, and retiree protective legislation to channel benefits to white people, thereby excluding black Americans from what is otherwise a revolution in the status of most working Americans. I will also skip how the GI Bill's creation of middle class America by giving $95 billion to veterans and their families between 1944 and 1971 was deliberately designed to accommodate Jim Crow. So too will I bypass how black people were prevented from partaking in the consumer credit market, a market that helped white people who could access it build and protect wealth. Nor will time and space permit my elaborating how local officials' racial hostility meant that even those benefits that black people could formally obtain were unequally distributed among racial lines. And I could not possibly discuss every way in which, in light of this history, facially race-based policies still work race-based harms today. Example is racially disparate tax system treatment, the disproportionate location of toxic waste facilities in black communities, or the deliberate action of governments at all levels in designing interstate highways to bisect and segregate black urban communities. The point is this: given our history, the origin of persistent race-linked gaps should be no mystery. It has never been a deficiency of black Americans' desire or ability to, in Frederick Douglass's words, stand on their own legs. Rather, it was always simply what Justice Harlan recognized 140 years ago, the persistent and pernicious denial of what had already been done in every state of the Union for the white race. I think it'd be interesting to see how those statistics match up in the Caribbean, in the British Overseas Territories, in the financing sector of these we see it already how they do racially discriminate in terms of, I think, just with like anti-money laundering laws and financing services, offshore financial services. The black countries of the Caribbean seem to get this big stick approach, but then they try and glamorize like Jersey and these other smaller predominantly white communities or overseas territories that offer the same services, but then they wanna beat the black countries with a stick and call them corrupt and, oh, you gotta do this, like squeezing wealth of, I don't know, but we'd have to have a long discussion about that. Let me just focus on this judgment, not get sidetracked. History speaks. In some form, it can be heard forever. The race-based gaps that first developed centuries ago are echoes from the past that still exist today. By all accounts, they are still stark with wealth and income. Just 4 years ago, in 2019, black families' median wealth was approximately $24,000. For white families, that number was approximately 8 times as much, about $188,000. These wealth disparities exist at every income and education level. So on average, white families with college degrees have over $300,000 more wealth than black families with college degrees. This disparity has also accelerated over time, with a roughly $40,000 gap between white and black household median net worth in 1993 to a roughly $135,000 gap in 2019. Median income numbers from 2019 tell the same story. $76,000 for white households, $98,000 for Asian households, 56,000 for Latino households, and 45,000 for black households. These financial gaps are unsurprising in light of the link between home ownership and wealth. Today, as was true 50 years ago, black home ownership trails white home ownership by approximately 25 percentage points. Moreover, black American homes, relative to white Americans, constitute a greater percentage of household wealth, yet tend to be worth less, are subject to higher effective property taxes, and generally lost more value in the Great Recession. From those markers of social and financial unwellness flows others. In most state flagship higher educational institutions, the percentage of black undergraduates is lower than the percentage of black high school graduates is in that state. Black Americans in their late 20s are about half as likely as their white counterparts to have college degrees, and because lower family income and wealth forces students to borrow more, those black students who do graduate college find themselves 4 years out with about $50,000 in student debt, nearly twice as much as their white compatriots. As for post-secondary professional arenas, despite being about 13% of the population, black people make up only about 5% of lawyers. Such disparity also appears in the business realm, with the roughly 1,800 chief executive officers to have appeared on the well-known Fortune 500 list. Fewer than 25 have been black. As of 2022, only 6 are black. Furthermore, as the COVID pandemic raged, black-owned small businesses failed at dramatically higher rates than white-owned small businesses, partly due to disproportionate denial of forgivable loans needed to survive the economic downturn. Health gaps track financial ones. When tested, black children have blood lead levels that are twice the rate of white children, irreversible contamination working irremediable harm on developing brains. Black and Latino children with heart conditions are more likely to die than their white counterparts. Race-linked mortality rates disparity has also persisted and is highest among infants. Yeah, there's also a issue with that we've seen it more frequently in the news about how in prenatal care and things like that, how black women tend to have a lesser quality of prenatal care, I guess, and they tend to I don't know, they just have more higher death rates or something. So too for adults, black men are twice as likely to die from prostate cancer as white men and have lower 5-year cancer survivor rates. Uterine cancer has spiked in recent years among all women, but has spiked highest for black women who die of uterine cancer at nearly twice the rate of any other racial or ethnic group. Black mothers are up to 4 times more likely than white mothers to die as a result of childbirth, and COVID killed black Americans at higher rates than white Americans. Across the board, black Americans experience the highest rates of obesity, hypertension, maternal mortality, infant mortality, stroke, and asthma. These and other disparities, the predictable result of opportunity disparities, led to at least 50,000 excess deaths a year for black Americans vis-a-vis white Americans. That is 80 million excess years of life lost from just 1999 through 2020. Amaki tells us that race-linked health inequalities pervade nearly every index of human health, resulting in an overall reduced life expectancy for racial and ethnic minorities that cannot be explained by genetics. Meanwhile, tying health and wealth together while she lays dying, the typical black American pays more for medical care and incurs more medical debt. We can pause here, guys.